The Citizen Mike Show. News. Commentary. Interviews. Citizen Mike Show starts now.
Welcome to the Citizen Mike Show. Thanks for tuning in. We do appreciate it. My name is Mike Brudzinski. On my right, the editor of the Record Journal. And on my far right, for a return, Steve Knight. Everyone in the viewing audience knows Steve Knight, now a columnist for the Record Journal, former town councilor. Steve, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, I read and heard about with great envy your trip around the world.
Yes.
And you brought some photos.
I did a few.
And Ralph and I are excited.
Good.
To see those photos. So what you know, it was an extensive trip, and as we get up that first photo, just sort of walk us through the big view of the trip, and then take us where you were.
Okay, good.
So, Bruce, let's get that first photo up.
Let me just quickly say that the trip lasted 6 months. It began on January 3rd of 2018 and in Miami, and ended up at that very same dock in Miami on July 1st. It was 180 days. And we stopped at 70 ports, in 38 countries on 5 continents.
So I'm going to ask you some logistical questions
Sure.
in between the first and second photo we have up. But I threw a label up on here, West Africa.
Yes.
Okay, give us a quick overview of that. And when that comes down, I'll ask you more about the logistics of your trip.
This is a tiny country. The ship we were on is only 600 feet long. So we were able to go to places where the big cruisers don't go. And this is one of them, and the country is named Benin. And we were on an excursion that would take us to Lake Nokoui. And as we got to the end of Lake Nokoui, we came upon a stilt village with 20,000 inhabitants. It was fascinating. And West Africa, most of this is a tiny little country in West Africa. I had never heard of it before. So
let's take that down. I got some logistical questions. So was this an organized tour that you just you write one check?
It was.
And everyone... Then you.
It was a cruise.
It's a cruise. Okay.
Okay, so we booked it with Oceania Cruise Lines. It was the same ship from Miami to Miami.
Okay.
Of the 600 passengers, 186 of us were going all the way around. All the other passengers, the 400 plus other passengers, were going on 1 or 2 of the 8 segments that the round the world cruise was broken into.
Okay. Let's get that second photo up and see what that shows.
Oh, this is one of my favorites.
Okay.
In fact, this is the next stop we made in a little tiny, it's an island called Sao Tome. It's off the coast of Angola. Years and years ago, it was a Portuguese colony. We were going into one of the small towns. There was as you can see in the background, a school, and the kids spotted this bus full of tourists from the from white tourists, frankly. And
that would be you.
That would be me and everybody else
very much so.
on this particular bus.
Okay.
And they were very excited. It was such a delight to see. Look at the expressions on those children.
Yeah.
I actually entered that photo into a contest and labeled it the hope and optimism of children.
Good.
Despite the relative poverty that they live in, children are children. They start life optimistic and hopeful and happy. And you can see it in their faces right there. It was one of the highlights of the trip.
All right, let's go to photo 3 and see what that shows.
We also spent a good deal of time in South Africa. And Table Mountain is one of the iconic places overlooking, it's part of Cape Town, overlooking the entire city. And that's at the top of Table Mountain. South Africa, we could spend the rest of the hour talking about South Africa.
Let's take that one down. I'm going to ask Ralph a question, is whether, or ask you, Steve, is Cape Town a place that Ralph may want to go to? Or would he rather go to Paris or
I think
Rome
Cape Town and South Africa is much more interesting than any place in Europe because of the recent history. As much as any, and the current.
You mean apartheid?
And what's developed since apartheid. The country is sort of set apart from a lot of sub-Saharan Africa because of not just the apartheid, but the riches, the gold, the diamonds, the extent of the natural resources. And the country is fascinating, and it really is.
Let's get the next one up there, Bruce.
I put this in because
Sure.
French Polynesia, they say it's paradise. It is. This was a little tiny island that we went to for an afternoon.
Kind of like Wallingford.
Yes, but I wanted to show you the clarity of the water.
Yep.
And the tranquility in the picture itself is the way many of these islands are. French Polynesia is 8 hours to Tahiti from Los Angeles. It's not that far.
Okay, we're on board.
It's worth it.
8 hours by plane?
8 hours by plane.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Ralph would go first class.
Yes.
Next photo. Let's see what we got.
This is Vietnam, the Mekong Delta. It's a little tributary off the Mekong River. But we went on a little rafting trip. I thought of the expression on the woman that was
She in your boat, or
she's in our boat. She's
in your
rowing.
boat. She's part of
she's one of the crew.
Okay.
And I just found everything about her just kind of an interesting study. Vietnam in itself, we went there with some trepidation. We grew up in the 60s. You were in Vietnam, were you?
Yeah, not as a tourist, though.
And I know that, Mike. But we weren't sure how we'd find it. But we were just we were very impressed with how the country is developing.
Okay, what else we got, Bruce?
This is Myanmar, formerly called Burma. This is in Yangon, the capital, and it's called the Shwedagon Pagoda. It's actually a couple of hundred buildings. This one being the largest of the Buddhist temples. We saw it at night. We went back the next morning for 2 or 3 hours. It's stunning.
Okay.
It's stunning.
All
And
right.
Myanmar is an interesting place.
Bruce, we have one more, or that does it? I think that.
It should be.
Oh, we got the elephants.
You can't go to Africa without going on a game drive.
Absolutely.
And we went on 2.
Yeah.
This is Amboseli National Park in Kenya. And we flew there and spent a day. And I have, of course, 150 pictures of the place. But that was one of my favorites.
I like that. I like that photo.
Very
You know?
nice.
Yeah.
Very
Like they got themselves arranged. For you.
Yes,
You know,
wasn't
they
that?
set themselves up left to right.
Yep,
small
wasn't
and
that
big.
polite of them?
Yeah. Okay. Good. Let's talk about otherworldly
Okay.
affairs. Let's go back to Wallingford, very worldly place. And Steve, you've written some columns recently on issues that have appeared in the papers, stuff that's been in front of the town council. The ordinance committee of the Wallingford Town Council is considering whether or not to adopt a local ordinance that would ban the sale of e-cigarettes and similar products to kids under 21. There was a piece today, actually, in the Hartford Courant. I want to read you a couple sentences and then
Sure.
get your take on what the town council may do. And the title of this was Vaping Causing Drastic Increase in Teen Tobacco Use. E-cigarettes are rapidly driving up tobacco use among U.S. youth, despite years of progress in reducing smoking rates for middle school and high school students, according to a new report from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. In 2018, 27.1% of high school students reported using tobacco products within the past month, up from 19.6 in 2017, according to an annual study by the CDC. Among middle school students, 7.2% were currently using tobacco products, up from 5.6% the year before. So it sounded, Steve, based on the piece that you wrote, that you weren't too thrilled with what the town council was considering, this local ordinance.
Okay, let's take it step by step. One, would it be effective? Well, you've got, and perhaps Meriden is going to make a change, but let's say from the center of Wallingford to North Haven is less than 5 miles. I don't see how an ordinance covering just one town out of 169 is going to be effective. I did mention in the piece that the place that belongs is in the state legislature, and I believe, if I've read correctly, Liz Linehan and others have submitted legislation to do what the town council is possibly going to do.
Okay.
A couple of other things. You notice that what they're talking about in that article are middle school and high school students. Now, 18 to 21 is not likely to be many high school
Should be
students.
post-high school.
It should be post-high school. And I did put in the piece that if we think that people are mature enough to vote, to go into the armed services and so forth, that certainly the decision as to whether to buy an e-cigarette or even a cigarette seems to be something that the individual can make for himself or herself. That disturbs me that we are lengthening the maturing process as much as we are for something like this. If it goes to the state, it can be that where it belongs.
All right, so let me just read a couple lines that you wrote. Then I'm going to go to Ralph and
Okay.
and get his thoughts on it. This is bits and pieces from your piece, Steve.
Sure.
Why all of a sudden is it now within the purview of local government to make such a law? Here is the truthful answer: because it looks good in the media. Town councilors will be shown to be doing something about this problem, regardless of whether it will actually accomplish anything, which it most likely will not. Skipping. With so many other banned substances, making it illegal might make this more enticing to teenagers. If adults tell you you can't have it, it really must be more interesting than we thought. That's,
Right.
And then finally, you say in part, you talk about 18 and 19 and 20-year-olds. If they're old enough to decide to vote and other things, then maybe they should be old enough to decide whether they want to puff on a cigarette filled with tobacco or nicotine. So in conclusion, Steve, you're right. I would suggest that the good people of the Coalition for a Better Wallingford take their earnest and worthwhile campaign to Hartford. My question, wouldn't the same arguments be applicable to Hartford? In other words, legislatures would want to be seen doing good. Making it illegal would still,
Absolutely. I'm sorry.
the enforcement is still the same,
Right,
same problem. I mean,
Good.
go ahead. I mean,
No, I think you could. I think the one
Yeah.
one
And then
thing,
we'll go to Steve
the,
for the-
the one thing that the state coming up with one policy for all towns
Okay.
takes out of play is this notion that, well, we could pass something in Wallingford and North Haven wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
And then so people could just drive over the line. So
Okay.
if the state acts in unison, that's the one thing that you take out of.
So you're
play.
still in favor, like we talked last show, of local action and state action?
I'm okay with both. I
Okay.
mean, Steve makes
We'll go
good
Steve.
argument not to play.
Yeah.
I think you can make an argument on either side. I would come down on trying to make a statement, even if that's all it is.
Yeah.
And I just want to add two things quickly since we talked last.
Yeah.
Along with the study on tobacco use, there was also an article that came out that showed a relationship between vaping and school discipline that really surprised me.
That I didn't catch.
Okay.
Quickly bring me up to date on
Well,
that.
it was
Maybe I
just
did,
that,
but
that the number, there was this spike, and maybe we'll bring the article, I'll bring the article to a future show and quote from it. But basically that there was this spike in school discipline that was related to vaping in schools.
Kids that vape cause trouble.
Kids that vaping in schools, right.
Kids that vape cause problems, more
Right.
problems than their peers. Steve, you're in favor of the Hartford legislation?
I think at
because
this
all the
point-
problems you raised with the local would apply to Hartford.
To some degree, since I've written that column, I've discussed the subject, and I've seen a lot more.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I really didn't realize is how much nicotine is put in some of these pods, and I think that I'm surprised that hasn't come into the purview of the FDA. If there was going to be effective legislation, I would think that perhaps they'd want to examine the issue on a national level, especially the amount of nicotine they're jamming into these things.
It may come. Let's move on to another piece that
Sure.
you wrote, and this had to do with, well, at the time you wrote it, it had to do with the redevelopment of the Bristol-Myers property. And the time you wrote it, of course, you didn't know what was going to happen. And I think you wrote it in December. It was highly controversial at that time. I think you were leaning in favor of the plan that was proposed by Calaire for the redevelopment of Bristol-Myers. Of course, the special permit was eventually denied by the Planning and Zoning Commission in a very dramatic vote. You wrote in part, Steve, at the risk of alienating some friends who are opposing the project, I have to mention that this IX zone, which is where this is located, has been in existence in one form or another since 1971. It was designated a research and development zone in 71 and changed to an industrial expansion zone in the early 80s. And I think your point was, if this project couldn't go there, where the heck could it go? I think that's sort of where you were
there's
going.
that, and most of the houses on that area, as you well know, living up that way, weren't even in existence when this was an industrial designated an industrial zone. Let me just back up and say, I think the group did a fantastic job. They kept their cool. I think they floated some information that isn't quite accurate, but that's inevitable in an emotional issue like this. They did a good job. They got this thing killed. I mean, if they hadn't been as strong and as organized as they were,
Yeah.
I think it would have passed.
So how big a disappointment is this for you
Well,
and for the administration and for the Economic Development Commission? for...
All of the above, but primarily the Economic Development Commission. We are going to have to replace, as you know, over $3 million in local taxes. When that building comes down, that's when the taxes are going to disappear. We have a fantastic site. And from what I understand, those two buildings would net in the area of $2 million in replacement income. Given everything else that's happening in the state of Connecticut, $2 million is a lot of money, and I think we really need to develop that property. I don't know what else is going to go in there. I doubt the state of Connecticut economy, and I wrote that in the columns. The state of Connecticut is not a friendly place to build big manufacturing or research facilities, apparently.
Yeah.
So warehousing, given our track record in Connecticut, warehousing is what we're left with.
So let me change the subject and for another piece you wrote, I'm going to go to Ralph after I read this, and then over to you, Steve. And this is to draw Steve out.
Okay.
See, we're going to
We're
pretend
trying
like
to
he's
draw
not
Steve
there.
out.
We're going to chat. So when I think of the classic Republican, let's say from the
Right.
50s and 60s,
Right.
maybe it's carried forward, but certainly not in recent years. A lot of times they would say, well, we would like to run government like a business, and you would think that means consolidation, cost efficiency, return on investment, all those business concepts. And so regionalization in the state of Connecticut, consolidating services that are spread among towns, consolidating them to like a county system
Right.
or a larger, not 169 little fiefdoms, but larger regional authorities would be right in the wheelhouse of classic Republican conservatism because it's cost efficiency.
Right.
Yet I read a column, February 1 of the Record Journal by Steve Knight, who
Right.
goes the other way. And he writes in part, this year, most of the attention concerning state government will revolve around fulfilling progressive dreams such as, marijuana legalization, which I think we're not in favor of, right? I'm not, but I wasn't. Tolls every few miles, okay. Paid family medical leave. But he says something else is happening at a slower but more inexorable pace that'll eventually have an enormous impact on towns like Wallingford, and that is local governments perhaps losing control of some of their agenda. Steve, isn't that what classic republicanism was all about? Consolidating, cost efficiency, even it means regionalization. I mean, I had trouble sort of squaring that circle when you wrote that.
If truly that were a business,
Yeah.
let's limit it to education
Sure.
for the time being, because it's a wider topic than that. But education, we turn our children over to a local organization called the Board of Education and the school system. But those are our kids, and we should have as much control over that bureaucracy and that education as possible. And when you take that away from a local school system, let's say it was Durham, they'll end up having to send their kids out of town to another school. Their parents will have very little, if any, control over what their education is those kids' education is going to be. It gets, and as I go on to say, the biggest danger I see right now is the reorganization of the educational system is really just it's the point at which we start to recognize that state government is being run by and large for and by the urban areas. Now, the urban areas are in tough shape. I get that. But, and yes, and they've been trying for
But
years
I want to get
now.
to the cost control part of it. Isn't that a value? I mean, a value that everyone in the state wants? Limit costs, regionalize central services so you don't duplicate health departments. I mean, you're talking about the Board of Ed, and I get that. But engineering departments, you don't have to duplicate. Sanitarians, you don't have to duplicate. All that, registrar of voters could be regional. I mean,
If I thought the larger the government got, the more efficient it got, I would agree with this.
you don't agree with that part of the regionalization.
Well, because I don't think it is efficient. I think by and large school systems, and I read an article just today about the education budget in New Haven, and New Haven is where this is coming as Senator Looney's. This is one of his ideas. Their published budget, their recommended budget to the mayor, projects a $30 million deficit, and in that budget, they already fold in a $10 million increase of state aid. Now, that's a system, it sounds to me, that sounds a little out of control.
Well, but I don't want to beat this up too much, and I want to get Ralph in on
Yeah.
this. If Durham let's say, just ran out of students. They had such a small student body. It just made no sense for them to go on. Isn't it economic waste to insist that they continue on with their school system? And same with all these small little towns and sort of in the outskirts of the state, to insist and require that they have their own little schools is just economic waste. So you take the Durham kids, you bring them into Wallingford, and build a new high school. Everyone's dream has come true. What's wrong with that theory?
Well, if Durham comes to that conclusion,
Yeah.
which they might, I think, economically,
Yeah.
financially, that may come to pass. If Durham decides that that's in their best interests,
You're okay with it?
I'm okay with it.
Okay.
When Hartford decides that it's in Durham's best interest, I'm not so sure.
Ralph, where are you on all
Well,
this?
I think that to keep with your idea of, we tend to think of Republicans as in support of running government like a business.
I mean, that's what I read.
Okay, right. No, and I want to just keep going with that. Because to me, regionalization is like consolidation in the private sector. So what you want to do, say you were going to consolidate schools, what you would say is, what are the boots on the ground that need to be in each town and are important to each community? Well, certainly you need schools. You need teachers. You need principals. I don't think anybody's trying to pull those out of any particular town. To me, what regionalization is doing is like the private sector saying, okay, what are your back office services that have nothing to do with actually boots on the ground, teachers in the classroom? So what you're talking about are things like business office, administration, providing food, cafeterias. Those are all things that you could look to consolidate. And really, the kids in the classroom whether the kids in the classroom have a business office that is entirely in Wallingford.
They'll never know.
They'll never know. And it was why I just want to add a point, though, like that I think that the Wallingford Board of Education, as I thought about that, when I watched them try to phase out cafeteria workers,
Yeah.
that just seems so backwards to start with, like, going, looking for efficiencies in the cafeteria, your lowest paid employees, your employees that are having a lot of content. I just thought that was so contrary to the way private sector would approach it, where what you should be looking at is top administration. So they were like here when they should have been here.
Yeah.
In my thought. That's just my thought. Go ahead.
Let's
I'm
give
sorry.
Steve the final word on
Yeah.
that topic, then move on to something else.
Well, I think Ralph's onto something about the back office stuff and or the consolidation. Look, I just saw an article on TV tonight about Plymouth, Connecticut, and there's a proposal to contract out their 911 service. I don't mean contract it out, but
know what you mean.
to go
Regionalize
with regionalize it. Most of Litchfield County is in one big 911 dispatch area, and that's working, and that's done by the individual towns for the purpose of saving money, and they themselves have made that decision, and it's working as far as they can see.
So let's change the
it's working
subject,
out.
something a little more frivolous, a little more fun.
That wasn't frivolous.
Well, more. We're going to get even more
My
frivolous.
segment was a little frivolous.
No.
Yeah.
Bruce has a JPEG, but I just
Yeah.
want to show you this before it goes up on the screen. This is the cover of National Geographic magazine, June 2018. Bruce, you've got an iteration. Let's put that on the screen, see what we can see. And it's if you get closer to the screen, it's actually a picture of an upside down plastic bag that looks like an iceberg floating in the ocean. And the cover of National Geographic says 18 billion pounds of plastic ends up in the ocean each year, and that's just the tip of the iceberg, hence the cover. And you go just a couple of pages in, and National Geographic writes, a plastic shopping bag has a working life of about 15 minutes, and we're using 1 trillion of them a year. That's one highly visible source of plastic trash, but it's only the tip of the iceberg in an ocean saturated with plastics. Bruce, take that down and we'll get to the point.
Okay.
Because we're not doing global policy, but maybe we are. So I saw 2 articles in the paper. Hartford Courant, February 7, New Britain is considering banning single-use plastic bags. Reading a little bit, looking to follow the lead of several Fairfield County communities, New Britain is considering a ban on single-use plastic bags at supermarkets and other stores. A new ordinance would fine shopkeepers as much as $250 for giving customers plastic bags. And then there's another article in the Hartford Courant entitled "Plastic Bags Could Be Targeted and Sooner Than You Think," and it reports on an initiative in Hartford that may make it state legislation. Of course, the plastics industry continues to argue against any bag ban. Steve, your perspective on a local ordinance banning or somehow restricting plastic bags and controlling it in some way, and a state ordinance. What do you think?
Well, let me give you a little background on. I actually saw some of that stuff on our trip, and one of the lecturers that we had pointed it out. I had never heard of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, and it is all plastics. And there's trillions of pounds of this stuff. Either it's floating on the surface or a few feet under, or it's on the seafloor. It is a problem, and it is a problem that needs to be addressed, not just in the United States, and certainly not just in Wallingford, but now we saw it in some of the countries that we traveled in. They do not have the infrastructure. They don't have the garbage pickup and so forth that we have here, and it's unbelievable.
They just toss
and
it.
It's mostly bags. They're everywhere.
So what do you think?
I think it's a good idea. I think
Wow.
it's time. It's time. We
We
go to
have a
Portland.
Republican who
Oh.
rails against the nanny state, and
Yes.
go ahead. But
I don't think
this
this-
is what a little traveling will do.
Right, right.
This
But
is what a little
yes.
traveling will do.
This certainly, this has gotten our attention.
Yeah.
And we've just seen it up front and personal. And it's a bad situation. These bags are. We all now use these little bags that you can buy for $2 or whatever.
Yeah.
They're everywhere. We go to Portland, Maine a lot, and Portland did this several years ago. Life as we know it still exists up there because
Could they ban?
they either charge for them or they offer plastic or paper. But I think they haven't fully banned them, but they make them expensive.
Ralph, what do you think?
I'm okay with a plastic bag ban, and the other one that I think of all the time is there should be no paper towels in restrooms. Everybody, I mean, these hand dryers should be mandatory. You look down into these garbage pails that are full of these paper towels.
Yeah.
It's just not necessary.
Well, we have consensus then. I know in some of my travels recently, we were in some countries that either didn't have plastic bags for customers. They weren't necessarily banned. They just didn't have them,
Right.
or there was a charge. And when you hear about the charge, you don't want the plastic
Right. No,
bag
you don't.
anymore. And the locals get the idea that they bring their own cloth
Right.
or canvas shopping bags, and everyone's happy and gets a little training. In a couple of years, everyone adjusts, and Wallingford does its part, small as it may be, but maybe word gets around. And it becomes a bit of a trend, and you can make a dent in it.
And Mike, just to add, as opposed to the vaping thing, you can see the difference. You can control it. The vaping thing, I don't think you can't really control it. Walmart isn't going to move because they can't give out plastic bags anymore.
Let's change the subject to local politics. Election year 2019. Are you aware of the Republican lineup running for councils? Is it
No,
the same people? Is
I'm
that
not.
still a bit of a mystery? Or
I don't think so. I don't think so. You would think that,
You think the incumbents would run
I would,
again?
yeah,
But
I haven't heard otherwise.
Okay. What's your prognosis? Do you think the Republicans will get in again on the council 6-3 like they have it now? Is it going to be closer because of Trump or just because of circumstances? Or it'll be a wipeout, Republicans have it hand down?
I don't think Trump's going to be a factor.
Okay.
For one thing, he carried Wallingford, and didn't carry the state, and that's why I think there was an impact on the state. The state, what happens this year in the next 6 months by June 30th is going to really determine
The budget.
the
Is that what you
budget.
meant?
Yeah. Already, Governor Lamont has said that we're going on a debt diet. Now, that is something that Bill Dickinson has been predicting for years, that someday it's going to, all of this has to come home to roost. And it looks like some of it is about to.
Well, I want to stay on the local scene for just a minute. You were on the council, 10 years?
14.
14 years. But you've been off it for a while.
Mhm.
As you look back when you were on the council, and I think you and I were on it for a while simultaneously, do you see compare and contrast for us? Is there any differences in sort of the style between when you were on, back then and currently?
I think I will tell you this. I do believe that when the parties, when I was there, and when you were there, Mike, I think the parties worked together as a caucus better. Each party worked together better. I really do. I don't know. I can't speak to how the three Democrats deal with each other. They seem fairly independent of each other. And I know for a fact that a lot of the Republicans are independent. It's like herding cats up there. So to that extent, I find it different.
Yeah, fair point. There was a recent story about the state of the town address given by the mayor. I have the New Haven Register iteration of that story. Wallingford Mayor touts growth in 2018 grand list. Decline in crime. There's a small decline in crime that the mayor reported that
Everywhere.
That's in this story.
Across
Yeah.
the board.
Yeah, he just
It's
mentioned it.
nationwide,
Yeah,
actually.
yeah.
Prosperity will bring that. to some
And
degree.
I mentioned, and not to get off on a tangent because I want to
Right.
ask Steve another question, but we were talking about additional police officers, and that I read this is actually a decline in crime. But,
Right.
again, not just in Wallingford, but there's a Democratic challenger now who is out there, very willing to give quotes to whoever will take them, challenging Mayor Dickinson. Is he, in your view, going to coast again? Because that's what he's been doing for the last, umpteen election cycles.
No, I think that I don't think he's going to coast because Jared is out so
Jared
early.
Liu.
Is out so early.
Okay.
And is it seems to me that he's giving it his all. Well, for one thing, he certainly is giving it all in hopes that he gets the nomination from the Democratic Party. But also, he's gonna he's gonna be pushing Bill on a lot of issues. Let's just say that. I don't necessarily think he's really got his platform sorted out, given what I've read yet. But he's certainly he's coming out with the platitudes and we've got to do this and we got to do better. And I give him credit for that. Right now, eventually he's going to have to get a little more specific. But Bill never takes his opponents lightly.
Let's change the subject and talk about Donald Trump. We've asked at least a couple of Republican counselors their view of Donald Trump. Steve, I want to get yours, but I want to set the table. I want to set you up. I want to set the table and see if you agree or disagree or to what extent. This is an editorial on the editorial page of February 10, New York Times. It's sort of in the middle of the column. And it's talking about the Republican Party. and it says the Republican Party has allowed itself to be hijacked by a reality television star who is a pathological liar, emotionally unsteady, and accountable only to himself. And Republicans have embraced presidential conduct that, had it been engaged by a Democrat, they would have denounced as corrupt, incompetent, and even treasonous. What's your reaction to the Washington Post article?
It's
And what's
it's the New York Times.
The New York Times article.
I mean, it's the New York Times.
Ah?
I will say this, he's Trump. Well, I'm not even. I guess he's Machiavellian enough, but he's got the entire media following him around like imprinted ducks.
But I want to get to the merits. I want to get to the merits.
Well,
Does he have the moral core to be
but
president?
you're talking
Yeah.
about a comment like that
Yeah.
in the New York Times. I think the comment is. It's.
Not fair.
I don't think it's fair, but the guy has done some very unusual things for a national politician. And I don't agree with all of them. I wish somebody would take his phone away from him.
But that's style over substance. You're saying,
But that's what a lot of it is.
But I want to get your view. I think what you're saying is substantively, you think Donald Trump is a worthy president, has the moral core to be president, is doing a good job, and you back him. He's got some problems in his style, but I think what you're saying is he's a good guy and you like him.
No.
Okay.
No. I mean, Trump the person is well. I didn't think that highly of Bill Clinton either. So he's certainly got his moral failings. So I think there are a lot of presidents that fit that, but from a policy standpoint, and really, if you would like to think we're going to start judging these people, they're not kings, so you got to judge them on their policy. The policies that he's followed are I like most of them. Okay. I support most of them.
Well, the term moral fiber, moral core has been bandied about. Not bandied. That's not the right word. It has been a serious comment. And a lot of Republicans, even before the election, the Republican slate that Donald Trump defeated, Romney called him a con man, you know, and actually the Republican candidates for president up and down the line criticized his moral core. I'm gonna use that word. You have no problem with?
No,
or that just not relevant.
Right now he doesn't. He's a poor representative of the best of America. I mean, as a person, but he won this thing, and the policies he's put into place, many of them are working, or the rollbacks and some of the regulation that was put in by the previous administration, I think has been good.
Okay. I promised Steve and I promised myself we would not relitigate, what's going on in Washington, D.C., because that would take a couple of shows.
Oh,
and,
absolutely.
An
entire show.
Yeah. So we're not going to relitigate it, but we're going to let Steve have the last word on that unless you want it.
Nope.
I didn't think you'd want to weigh in on that.
No,
but
I thought you guys handled it well.
Okay. Global warming, climate change. President Trump says it's a hoax, it doesn't exist. The scientists disagree. Where do you stand?
I believe this is where I stand. I believe that there is such a thing as climate change. I think the Earth has had climate change for probably most of its existence. We are going through another period of climate change where the Earth's climate appears to be warming up.
Caused by human activity or not?
Somewhere here's no human activity, here's terrible human activity. We're just as divided on that issue as we are everything else. Somewhere in that spectrum, there is some science that I don't think has really been settled. I don't believe that we need to kick the game board over and absolutely turn our economy into something from the 1600s.
Okay. We always talk about climate change. Not
You
always,
have
but
been
we
talking about it from the moment I was on this show.
Well, and before that.
And before that,
and
right.
before
But
that.
I want to say even
One of the
in
first-
2012 or 2013,
Yeah.
there wasn't as much attention
That's
being
right.
paid to it.
No, I've been on this for a long time.
Right.
And one of the first major ceremonial functions I had when I was chairman of the council was to give a graduation speech at Lyman Hall, and I mentioned among other things climate change, and that had to have been back in '08 maybe, or
Yeah,
maybe
yeah.
'09. I mentioned climate change and the first Latina Supreme Court Justice, Sotomayor. I mentioned that as sort of the developments in our, that have been in the news. So I've been on this, been caring about this for a while. But there's some recent stuff I wanted to roundtable with you guys. One is some polling that had been done among Republicans, and it seems that a majority of Republicans agree that there is climate change, global warming. It has a lot to do with human activity, and certainly not the Republican leadership. I'm not saying that, and probably not the Trump base, but the broader Republican rank and file voters believe there is climate change caused by activity, and something should be done by government to do it. Quickly moving on, there was something in the Hartford Courant, February 7, the last 5 years of the 5 hottest on record. I'm reading a little bit here. All 5 of the hottest years on record have occurred in the last 5 years, according to global temperature data released by NASA. While 2018 was slightly cooler than the 3 prior years, Earth still had its 4th warmest year since scientists began keeping records. A quick thing from The Economist, and then one more, and then I'm going to go to Steve. The recent issue of The Economist says, in America, the world's largest economy, and its second biggest polluter, climate change is becoming hard to ignore. It talks about some extreme weather, which is not necessarily the same as climate change, and it's acknowledged. But here's what they say. In 2017, America said it would withdraw from the Paris Agreement, and the Trump administration has tried to resurrect the coal industry. Even so, climate could yet enter the political mainstream and win cross-party appeal. Polls suggest that moderate and younger Republicans care. And then finally, there was a piece in the Hartford Courant. The Hartford Courant likes to solicit young writers, and this is from a 15-year-old, so it's easy to dismiss, I suppose, because it's only a 15-year-old, right? And what do we care? I mean, they won't vote for another, few years. I do care, but
Yeah.
I say that somewhat, facetiously. She starts by saying, "I'm 15." Skipping a little bit, she says she just watched a State of the Union address where climate change didn't even come up. So it's an enormous relief to hear an adult in a position to do something articulate the urgency of our situation and the need for action. Who is that adult she's talking about is that firebrand Democratic congressman from New York, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who, the Republicans like to poke fun at with the new Green New Deal. Newsflash to parents. We need you to show us that you understand what we're up against by treating climate change like the emergency it is. Steve, the reason why I bring it up, it seems like there are a lot of Republicans who will accept and want to work on climate change, although the leadership doesn't seem to want to. Young folks, Republican and Democrat, seem to accept it too. Not all, but a majority. Is the Republican Party on the correct side of this issue? You have young kids, you have the younger generation, you have science behind you. What is the problem, as you see it, with the Republican leadership sort of getting closer to some sort of acknowledgement that government has a role to play?
Well, okay. This is a very complicated issue, and of course government has a role to play. But if you look at that Green New Deal,
Oh, no,
I mean, come on. Let's
I don't
get
want to
back
debate the
down
Green
to
New Deal
earth.
because a lot of it's pretty extreme. I was just referring to the letter from
Well,
the 15-year-old.
I understand,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
but she is referring to that Green
Yeah,
New
she is.
Deal.
Yeah, because the Green New Deal addresses climate change.
And
Yeah.
but it addresses climate change in. I'm sorry, it's crazy to think that you're going to take a $24 trillion economy and you're going to flatten it.
Well, my question really was not quite to mock the Green New Deal. That really wasn't the thrust of the question. My question really was, are the Republicans on the right side, on the correct side of the climate change debate? Maybe it'd be in their best interest, Republicans' best interest, and everyone's best interest if they acknowledged climate change, global warming as at least in part a man-made problem, and instead of being hostile to government doing something, sort of acknowledge the government has a role to play.
I'm not sure that you're framing it the way I would frame it.
Oh, I know I'm not. You would frame it differently. That's why I'm framing it.
I mean, if regulation is going to have to, if we're going to address climate change, there is going to be more regulation. What I think, at least my position, and I think at least a lot of Republicans don't want to do, is trash the United States economy under the guise of preventing or correcting the climate change. And that there's going to be a lot of technology that develops in the next 40 or 50 years. And I was just listening to somebody today, and he brought it up, and I hadn't thought of it, nuclear fusion. Now, that is nirvana for everyone. That is in our future. But if we spend jillion dollars putting solar panels across the United States and building wind farms wherever they're
That would be just
relevant. Well, I mean, it's a waste.
awful. Okay.
It's a waste. It won't solve the problem, and it won't make enough of a difference, and it will cost the United States economy millions of jobs.
Ralph, do you want to mediate this?
Well, I don't know if I'm going to mediate it, but I would just say real quickly, you know, this should be about science. I mean, there's plenty of reports, there's plenty of studies that can tell lawmakers everything they need to know about climate change.
Well, there are tons of reports. The Republican leadership won't read
right,
them.
right, well,
That's
right,
the
well,
problem.
but I think-
There's no debate
Right.
where science is.
Okay, and
It's
I-
settled. It's settled.
Right, and I
the
agree.
leadership says it's I'm sorry.
No, no,
The
no.
leadership says it's unsettled, but it's settled. Go ahead.
No,
Yeah,
and I agree 100%.
Yeah.
There is science,
Yeah.
and there are lawmakers.
Right.
And a group of lawmakers should be able to take the science and come up with policy. They can't, because this issue a long time ago became politicized.
Yeah.
I can't go back and deconstruct how it became politicized.
Well, here's what
but
I
it
got
has become
interrupted because we're going to
politicized.
run
Go
out of
ahead.
time. The question I was raising, Steve, is what is the harm to the Republican Party?
There's none, Mike.
To the Republican Party,
There's
to
none
counting
except-
the votes.
Except that
What's
Al
the harm?
Gore put out a documentary on climate change
Okay, and that did it.
a long time ago,
Okay.
and the issue became politicized at that point.
Okay.
And it's science. It would be like politicizing how to end cancer. We know how to end cancer.
Yeah.
We know. So I agree with you.
Steve, you have the final word, and then we're going to wrap it up.
If I thought the Democrat Party had any interest in protecting the economy of the United States as we tackle climate change, I would feel a lot better about it. But they don't, and the Green New Deal is a perfect example of that.
To be continued on another show.
Yeah, we should go
because
back
I
to
think
that.
we're going to have Gina Morgenstein on.
Good.
Oh, that would be
we'll play some clips.
Good.
Anyway, we'll have some fun. Steve, thanks for coming on the Citizen Mike show.
Sure, I really enjoyed this.
We always enjoy when you're here. We had a good rollicking time. And thank you for watching the Citizen Mike show. We do appreciate it. We're here on Wednesday nights, but you can see Citizen Mike Show Thursdays, Fridays, Monday, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays at 9 on WPAA. That's why we usually say if it's 9 at night, it's Citizen Mike. And on YouTube, go to YouTube, punch in the Citizen Mike Wallingford channel, follow all the prompts. You'll come up with this episode. Or contact me or the studio and let us know you want an email link directly to the YouTube show when it's posted up, and we'll get that to you. Thanks to Steve Knight for coming on again.
Thank you.
We've enjoyed it, and thank you for watching. Good night, everybody.